Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, someone who really makes our community tick is in the studio with two people, actually, on one of the most interesting business stories in this decade, which has been the legalization of recreational use of cannabis. 3 years ago, Connecticut rolled it out, made it legal, and now the state legislature is deciding we need to update how we roll this thing out, because it didn't roll out perfectly. It didn't roll out the way that we think it could work best. So we're trying to figure out how to make it work best. And the two people visiting us today are playing an important role in helping the state figure out how to do that. Keeber Smith Bolden is the founder of Lit New Haven. It opened last year at 169 East Street, a dispensary, the only black woman-owned dispensary in the city, and we think the state. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't want to get into the discussion whether some was black or not. I'm saying that's not my discussion. You guys worked that out.
No, we skipped that. But yeah, we figured it out.
We got it.
And we have Nicole Burns, is the executive director of, you ready for this, folks? The Connecticut Cannabiz Chamber of Commerce. And thanks for both coming in, folks.
Of course, yes. It's my pleasure to be here.
Now, before we get into the specifics, has it basically worked okay to legalize recreational use of weed in Connecticut?
Worked okay.
Did they roll it out basically okay and just need to fix some little stuff, or was it kind of a mess?
Go ahead, Nicole. You go. Because Nicole has different, I've been here from the beginning, so I had ideas about how it should be, and so from my perspective, it'll be a lot different from someone who, has come in and seen how things work. So
in other words, Nicole, the chamber, you're looking at the whole state whenever it goes through. And Keeber, really, for people who followed, was the person that this was supposed to work for, right?
Absolutely.
We said we're going to legalize cannabis, that there are communities that got disproportionately harmed by the war on drugs. So you want people of color to be able to open these dispensaries. And in Keeber's case, she goes 20 miles beyond that and hires people who were impacted by being arrested during the war on drugs. And it just sort of, there aren't many like that. They didn't actually happen. And Keeber, my sense is that it's a struggle day to day. I mean, any small business is a struggle day to day. But do you think there's specific ways that they screwed it up? Because we knew it was harder for you to start your business because the extra rules they put in. So in fact, it became harder rather than easier for someone of color to start a dispensary. But how's that going? When you're looking at the stuff you want them to fix, do you think that the idea of having a woman of color run a dispensary and hire people from the community, if that's something that this law has made something that's workable, or is it something the way the system's set up is made harder?
It's definitely made harder, but it is still workable. I've been able to work through a lot of this and a lot of the regulations that, make it difficult for me to advertise my business, for me to, be able to have certain things, happening in my business.
Like having like a lounge.
Right.
Kind of stuff.
Yeah. And those kind of things. So it has made it a little difficult, very difficult, but not impossible. And I will say that both the Social Equity Council, the legislature, and DCP even are open at least to conversations about making changes. What those things are.
DCP is the Department of Consumer Protection. Yes. They carry out the rules of what you can and can't do and what licenses you can get. Mm-hmm. I notice you have licenses all on your wall. Like everybody who walks in that door has some kind of license.
Yes, right? Yes.
And then they also, the Social Equity Council. Social equity is the fancy word for like, we're going to undo what we did in the drug war.
Yes.
And so they have a council that decides to help people like Keeber get into business. Like in New Haven, the one that opened right away was a white guy who was in the pharmacy business who had access to a lot of capital and had that thing running. Mm-hmm. You took longer to start up to get the capital right and what kind of hoops you had to jump through. And plus, and not that this is necessarily a bad thing, to qualify as a social equity enterprise, you have to do a lot of, and which you like to do, but you do all these community service projects. Mm-hmm. You have events for people in the community, right?
Right. So we have a highly regulated business with a lot of oversight, a lot of expense related to it, because buying cannabis products is very, very expensive. So my inventory, is hundreds of thousands of dollars at any given time. My payroll is about $10,000. So on top of all those things, a week, wow. Because I try to, of course, like, what would be the use of having a social equity focused business and then I hire and pay people less than a living wage. So we make that extra sacrifice and pay people living wage. No one on my staff makes less than $21 an hour.
Wow.
Everyone is over $21 an hour. But, with being in a highly regulated industry, having all of these things that I have to do, including giving back to community, as you said, which is something that's close to my heart, is what I want to do. I do above and beyond.
And good business.
And good business. But then, having to deal with all of the regulatory things, it just makes it hard on a regular basis just to become profitable, So
and
right now,
what benefits do you get? Social equity? Is there anything that qualifies you something somebody else want to get? Like, what's the whole point of having a social equity designation? How are they helping people of color start these?
So you do get reduced fees in applications. So like for me to apply was, it cost half of what the normal fee would be. My license, it was $12,500 as opposed to $25,000, which a non-social equity act licensee would pay. So we do get the reduced fees, but we still have, all of the requirements and oversight that people who are either well established because they were part of the medical cannabis industry and just transitioned into now either as a hybrid retailer or adult use retailers, and transitioned into our market. So, they've already have these established business, these customer bases, like it's, and I still have to deal with every single.
And then you have the additional requirements. We mentioned that you have to do the public service stuff, which is cool, but also they want to make sure that you're not a front for those same kind of corporations trying to get that. So if you have less access to capital as a person of color, you want a partner, they're going to scrutinize that partner to make sure, right? So they say you can't sell the business for 7 years. They want you to sell it. They're going to change this rule, but they want you to sell it to someone else who's qualified for social equity. So therefore it's harder to get that money. It's harder to cash out and make money back on your investment. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you are.
So how did you find the capital?
So that was a challenge in and of itself. So I just want to, use for a reference. It cost about $1.6 million. I had to obtain about $1.6 million to open lit. That was all of the specific guidelines of how we had to build out the facility. Hiring people, all that stuff. $1.6 million, I'd say. And we couldn't make any more than, I believe at the time it was like $220,000 a year.
Wait, they limit what your revenues can be?
No, what you could make as an individual to apply for social equity, to qualify.
Oh, you have to make sure your income was below that. Okay.
Right. So already there was this creation of a disparate relationship.
You can't be a person who has access to enough capital to get that $1.6 million.
Exactly. So now I'm dependent on someone with that type of capital. That sets, there's a little inequity there in that, like, if you hold the purse strings, but I am supposed to be in control, there's going to be conflict there, So that created, a difficulty in being a social equity operator off the rip. And so I initially looked for partners, and I wanted to cultivate, which I still do, and I'm approved to do so.
And you already knew the deal. I mean, you had already done medical cannabis. I mean, you were someone who this law was supposed to help. Not only person of color, but someone who knew the business.
Right. And not only help, I did feel like, being that I was an advocate who really worked to help shape the legislation, I should have been consulted, like as I'm going through it, I should have been talked to a little more. Like during the process, even in the beginning, once legalization happened and the creation of the Social Equity Council, I was introducing my friends from around the country, to come in and speak to the council, and so that we could take information from other states and what they were doing and really make a great industry here in Connecticut. I feel like in the beginning it was a situation where, this was a new law. Everybody wanted to follow the law to the T, wanted to make sure they didn't seem as if they were giving anybody favorable or preferential treatment. And so it became really like, us and them kind of situation, applicants and the council and the DCP and everybody in the legislature. I do feel like that has begun to change. But in the beginning it wasn't there.
And what kind of partner were you able to find so you could have the capital started?
So initially I partnered with an MSO, a multi-state operator. So they are large cannabis companies that, as in the name, are in multiple states and usually are highly capitalized, and who kind of this industry was built for, to work for. And so I wanted to cultivate. They were interested in cultivating. They had some stores here, and so it seemed like a good partnership because they weren't really necessarily the greatest players in the industry, and I thought they saw who I was and how important community was to me, and said, who better can we, make things right for our wrongs with than Kibra. So that's the reason why I chose them. Turns out that wasn't necessarily their true goal and focus, and then they ran out. They had some financial issues and they exited the partnership, and so I had to begin looking for new partners. Another business owner here in New Haven introduced me to my now financial partner, who doesn't like to be, he'd rather stay as quiet as he can. And so I was blessed to find someone.
Was this another MSO, multi-state operator?
No, a private individual, who is a business person here in the city. So very connected, to the city and a community-minded person. Yeah. So I'm that was a pleasure to be able to find someone.
So you got your
connected.
money, you got started up. It was very celebratory. You had all sorts of people in the community help you launch it, rooting for you. Mm-hmm. And how has that worked out with that relationship? Because
the partnership, again, I kind of mentioned, when there's a financial, commitment from someone, and I'm just coming with ideas, if you don't agree with my idea, but you have all the money, there are times that we have not seen eye to eye, and it has been difficult in those moments because I can't bend. I have to stay committed to social equity. I have to keep my promises I made to my community. And although those aren't necessarily the most profitable promises, they aren't the things that are necessarily.
Well, you mentioned paying $21 an hour. You mentioned hiring people sometimes who have had past convictions for the drug war.
Yes.
What other things do you mean, like having community events, things like that?
Yeah, having community events. How I have the events, most people can call, send us an email and say, we'd like to use your space for X. And I say yes. And it's usually not contingent upon any, financial exchange or anything like that.
I was thinking that's like an amazing space. Like the way you have it set up so cozy with the beautiful artwork and the chill sound and the couches and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it probably is something people would partner with you for use, co-working or something. Yeah.
Yep, and they have been, for different events. We just had a mixer that the BIPOC mental health counselors, had.
You do a lot of fun. You have gospel karaoke, which is my favorite thing at this dispensary. And
yes, I'm usually the one and only singer that day.
Oh yeah.
When people just come, they're like, we want to hear you sing. But yeah, we have a lot of fun events, and so if things aren't necessarily leading to profit, someone who is my financial investor is going to want to see that. But we have a bigger calling here. Yes, listen, I want to make a lot of money, leave a legacy for my children, my community, my family. But at the same time, there's a way to do it. And the way that I've been instructed by my Heavenly Father to do it is community centered and focused, and all the other things I believe will be added to us. So
we're talking about what it really means on the ground to run a legal cannabis dispensary in Connecticut, 3 years into legalization of recreational use of marijuana and cannabis in general. And there's a state bill now, there are two of them actually, that are responding to concerns that both the growers and the dispensary owners have had, as well as people in the community who are critical. And they're trying to make the system work better. Kibra Smith-Bolden, who founder of LIT, the New Haven's favorite dispensary, 169 East Street. And we got two people from the Connecticut Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, which I'm still getting my mind around that name. It's a really fun concept. We have Nicole Burns, who's executive director, and Anna Wood, the president. So Nicole, when you listen to Kibra, how does that fit into what you're trying to have accomplished at the state? One of the bills is HB 5350. That's going to do stuff like remove potency caps on or raise how potent you can have, how much THC. So in flower and pre-rolls, you could have 35% rather than 30, and I think no limits on like vapes and other kinds of compounds, rather, right? And then they're going to allow some of the key goals are that you're going to be able to do more marketing with colors and flavors and stuff. But the most important thing perhaps is another bill that will lower the taxes so that we're more competitive with other states, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So what are we looking for? I'm going to get real close to that mic. Yeah.
So I think for folks like Kibra and listen to her story, this is exactly who we're trying to help. The bill, like you said, for potency will increase revenue for Kibra, allowing more folks to come in to get more products that they are able to get on the medical side that she cannot get right now.
Or at illegally at the smoke shops.
Or illegally.
Because isn't that the reason
shop.
people go to smoke shops partly is that they get higher THC?
Absolutely. We are in a desperate fight right now against our neighboring states and also against the illicit market. You can go to any illicit market and get any unregulated, untested, unsafe product, no matter the potency, and they're winning right now against legal operators who did everything they were supposed to do. They dotted their I's, they crossed their T's, they did everything that was asked of them, and right now they are struggling. You have a business, 1 to 2 business that might close this year because they cannot
in Connecticut. We already saw one on the west side of town.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously this is not just the cannabis industry. This is all small businesses. But we are.
So part of your competition is come smoke shops where every half block there's one. And then the other one is from neighboring states, like in Massachusetts. I believe the number that I saw was that in Massachusetts, a price per gram of cannabis was $4.01 in December. And it was $4.01, and it was $7.69 in Connecticut because our taxes are higher, correct?
Yes. So the bill right now that we're working on, the tax bill, we are looking to get a 10.65 excise tax. And what that will do is that can bring in between 150 to 160 million dollars in revenue that we are currently losing to our bordering states. We're losing to New York, and we're also losing to Massachusetts.
And just to fully explain that, right now, Kibra and other dispensary owners have their people pay 3 kinds of taxes, right? You have a basic tax, and then on potency, and what's the third?
Local
Yeah.
city tax.
So they're saying, you went to them and said, let's have one uniform tax. It'll be total lower so that we can compete with Massachusetts.
Not one uniform tax.
So you will still have 3 taxes. But right now we are at a variable tax that is based on potency. So you can have a customer go in today and buy something based on one potency, and then go in tomorrow and pay a totally different price. So something that costs $30 at Kibra's is no longer $30 because they have to pay 3 different taxes. It can now be $60. Versus you go to Massachusetts, it's not the same.
So so the total amount isn't going to change?
Right now, though, they can go in no matter the potency. If we change this law, they can go in no matter the potency and know every single day what their price is going to be. There will be no guessing. There will be no extra work.
And that'll be a 10.5 potency tax.
10.65, and we'll be directly even with Massachusetts.
Okay. Well,
right now, the 3 taxes work together to essentially 25%, what amounts to a 26% effective tax rate, which is much higher than our neighboring states like New York and Massachusetts.
What will the total effective tax rate be if that goes through?
20%.
And what is it in Massachusetts?
20.
Okay.
Yeah, so it brings us at parity with our neighbors.
So is your argument that while that might bring in less per sale for the state, if we can compete more, because even Reno, as a grow operation outside Middletown, told me his own employees drive over the line in Massachusetts to buy cannabis because it's cheaper.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And is another issue also how potent it can be?
Yes.
Or is that more about the smoke shops?
Nope, that's as how point. It's both.
But this bill really doesn't change the potency a lot, does it? It's 30 to 35% for flower and pre-rolls, but then unlimited for compounds, right?
But significantly, it sort of, again, brings us to parity. I think everything...
If you can get closer, Mike, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. It brings us to parity with our neighboring states. So
and is that Massachusetts and New York?
Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey. And we're really looking, and every reform we're pursuing this year is to try to make the market competitive with our neighboring states. So from packaging, labeling, branding, to make sure that you can have a product that you buy that has colors, that has branding as a part of it, which our neighboring states have, so it's a more attractive product, to making sure that the potency levels, which is in the General Law Committee bill that Roland Lamar and Roland Lamar has been really very helpful to the industry and businesses like Kibra's here in New Haven. But they're leading a bill, and part of that bill is to increase potency levels, again, to bring them up to parity with our neighboring states so that the product offerings are competitive, and also to bring them to parity with the medical market so that folks aren't...
I was talking to Lamar about this today. Yeah. It's coinciding because we originally had medical marijuana. It's very confusing. Why do we need two separate kinds? Is that just a vestige that we have medical and then we did recreational? Why do we? I mean, I know you are both, Kibra, and you're very versed in this, but why do we need separate?
I think there's a consumer group that needs to have a diagnosis and a doctor, to say that I need cannabis, and then they want the guidance of a pharmacist to say, this is exactly, this is what you should try. It'll help with this particular symptom, and help you manage it and help them work through finding the right, thing that will help them, right cannabis product.
And is it also an insurance thing? Could they get it covered by insurance then?
Currently, no. I do believe that workers' comp will do something regarding, someone who prefers cannabis to opioids and things of that nature. But it's a very intricate process. But overall, no. Insurance is generally a federally, managed, overseen program, and it's still federally illegal.
So going back to the beginning of the process and the story that people...
If you get closer, Adam.
Going back to the beginning of the story and the process, how it evolved here in Connecticut, the industry. Kibra and I worked together on the decriminalization and then the legalization here. And the medical market was already operating, and so they had a huge advantage. So when the market did evolve moving forward, they had a really strong position in the market. So that's just another consideration kind of in the background for us all to be aware of.
So I was reading the testimony of these bills, the pro and con, and I have a sense of this is going to pass. There was pushback from people who were concerned about health and young people, but not just young people. THC concentrations, they say, why do we need the higher THC concentration? And what is the benefit? I know a lot of people they interview who go to the smoke shops. They say it's because it's higher THC. They want the higher THC. What's the benefit to THC? Because other people argue there's the balance of terpenes and that like the high you get actually isn't so dependent on the THC. But obviously people want higher and higher. So what is the benefit to the consumer of the higher THC?
The benefit to the consumer to the higher THC or to parity with our neighboring states, what they offer and what some of the illicit market offers is really the benefit to legalization. Kibra and I went all over the state talking about public health benefits, and the state created one of the most regulated markets in the country. They're very concerned with public health. They're very concerned with things like mold, things like being laced with illegal substances that are harmful to children and to adults. We've all read stories and know someone who's been impacted by those types of occurrences. And so what this really does is it will direct more consumers to the regulated market. And that's a benefit to consumers because there's public health and public safety regulation.
So there's the public safety. And that's always the big argument for dispensaries is you're not going to have fentanyl in it. You got metals in it. Someone's tested it and told you it's safe.
Yes. And can I just, because Nicole has said, something about the smoke shops winning, which in a way is very true. They are winning individually, but they're failing our community. Absolutely. Because they're unable to truly identify what this product is, to say that it is healthy, it is something that is consumable, because they don't know. At least through a regulated cannabis dispensary, we are watching that plant from the point it's a seed until it's sold and in that person's hand. It's tested. We know exactly what they're giving to individuals. I just went to a school, I won't say which one, but they had a young person buy a cannabis product from a smoke shop and overdosed. Had to be Narcan.
And I'm hearing this all these states.
Yes.
I was talking to someone from Michigan whose brother teaches school where the whole 5th grade collapsed at a gym or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So, again, I do not want my communities recriminalized. I don't want people to be arrested, but there is a level of responsibility now that I feel like, because I've been very, not contentious with the smoke shops and the unregulated market because I feel like these are my people. They're just trying to do a service. but it's becoming a disservice because of the products that are being disseminated in our community. And, I was asked a question at one of the recent hearings, like, how do we deal with the unregulated market? Like, what should we do? And I said, well, what I do at LIT, which is what we should be doing around the state, is inviting people who, like my weed men, work at LIT. The community, I've encouraged them out of brought them out of the unregulated market into the legal market. They're so proud to have their little cannabis worker certificates and, to say that they're part of the legal market. Of course, it's not the volume of money that they're used to seeing, but they realize that it's more to it than that.
You don't go to prison.
Right. And they were like one of my employees who was a part of a smoke shop. He said, I got sick of having to sell to kids. He's like, I don't want to sell to kids. Like, that's not my interest, but I can't tell it, if I'm doing it illegally, and so he was like, I'm glad to be here because I'm able to now do this right. And as far as, the youth and the concern, I understand. I too am concerned because the only place that the youth can purchase from are these unregulated markets.
So I've been thinking a lot about this, and we're talking with Keeper Smith Bolden, Adam Wood, and Nicole Burns about how to help the state improve our newish system for legal recreational marijuana sales here on WNHH's Dateline New Haven. So you're preaching to the choir in terms of why to go to a dispensary, because we're older, right, and we want to make sure we don't die.
But it's not even. But I do want to say it's not even just why we go to a dispensary, but why we should be across the board supporting the regulated market and dispensaries, because of the fact that if we don't support them and if we keep like all these fights about, well, this is affecting the kids. No, it's not me affecting the kids. Right. Like, if you help me to be able to have a more attractive, pricing, more products, more to be able to invite the adults into, my market, then they won't be purchasing from smoke shops, and then the smoke shops will not be able, kids can't keep them alive.
I was thinking, from Colorado, which was early on the legalization of recreational, there has been this challenge that no matter what you do, the black market continues. Yeah. So you're giving me one big answer is make sure we can compete on price and what we're selling. Mm-hmm. I'm also wondering about cachet, because it strikes me that there are some young people who act like going to a dispensary removes the sort of countercultural aspect. You know what I mean? And like I notice online sometimes, always people swear, especially people work at dispensary, how great it is and the great experiences they have and the relationships they have. But other people think it's like so uncool. Mm-hmm. Like that's corporate, that's and they're not as concerned maybe as older people with all the kind of like metals or the stuff China is sending over, not just fentanyl. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder how, when I'm listening to Kiever, I'm thinking you need stuff from the state, like the rules to be able to compete with other states and what they're selling. But I'm wondering whether it's a consumer education issue.
Absolutely.
There's always going to be a black market, and that basically you need to build enough of a market of people who don't want to die when they get high, and just
right. And I wrote that on my list, like education, because that's like the center of what we do. When you talk about potency, yes, that is people. What's the highest THC you have? So there's a scientific reason for them wanting a higher THC because of our endocannabinoid system, which would be a whole long story if I went all
the receptors in our brain that are built to take that and benefit from it.
And we build up a tolerance. So the same level of THC may not affect the person. They have to go higher in potency. And that's just because of our endocannabinoid system and the way that it works.
Is that just relentless for the rest of your life? You're just going to go up 10% every year or something?
Pretty much, but there also are ways, like I talk to my consumers about starting and stopping, like taking cannabis breaks, like resetting your endocannabinoid system. Some of the things that we're seeing.
How long breaks do you recommend?
It depends on what it is, what your goal is, so like if someone has cyclical vomiting related to cannabis, which is a real thing, it's a reset needed for their endocannabinoid system. The THC levels are too high and becoming toxic. So they have to, take a break. I recommend 2 weeks at least to like reset your endocannabinoid system, maybe even 30 days. But, and then you can gradually start back. But that will begin, you won't need such a high level, so your tolerance will decrease again. and then you'll be able to build back up. So no, not necessarily will you have to, if you do it right. And this is why lit is so important, because not only do we make it fun and have great events, and we try to make it cool, even though my kids say no matter what I do, I'm not cool, but
they're wrong.
They're wrong. Thank
and
you.
And all kids are wrong. Everyone under 40 is wrong about everything. Sorry, Doreen.
Right. But we also make education the center of what we do, because we get people all the time. You know, this THC wasn't high enough. I need something higher, and I can't necessarily offer them that. But what I can say is, at this point, without this law, but what I can say is, but let's look at some other things that make your experience. Like, what is the terpene profile? And we have access to that information, and we get people to start thinking about it. Like some very simple things, like linalool is a terpene, which comes from lavender. So automatically, what do you think of lavender? You're relaxing, you're sleeping, it's calming. So you want something with linalool in it if this is the effect that you're looking. So to be able to begin to have those conversations, but it usually starts off with THC levels. You know, they want to know that, but we're able to, because of the limits right now, kind of help them begin to think outside of the box. But we also need to offer that for people who are juggling major, you know, they're dealing with pain for, yes, you know.
So when you listen to this, Nicole, what I'm wondering about is, so obviously, I wonder if part of the answer is what kind of businesses, if people don't want corporate businesses. Like, you go to Lit and it feels this is a whole kind of community place, but most dispensaries are not like that. Is that part of the challenge in how you market your industry? Like you're a chamber of commerce, a cannabis chamber of commerce. Who would have imagined that years ago, that there'd be a cannabis chamber of commerce?
I think there's the misconception right now is that some places are not like Hebra. They are. They're just not able to do some of the things that they really want to do because they can't, you know, they can't market the way they want to people. People don't know that they're there. So they're because of lack of marketing.
What aren't you allowed to do? What are you allowed to do?
So you know, for instance, you can't market or target towards children. So you can't, you know, the things that maybe illicit market or teens themselves might be doing on TikTok or whatever else, we can't do those things. Hebra can't promote her products or business on social media.
But is there kind of advertising you're not allowed to do?
So the limits are, like, for instance, my sign that's facing the highway, that was highly scrutinized. I'm allowed to have it. The city approved it. But anyway, DCP said I had to add a note because children might be riding on the highway, see my sign, and want to come lit, I guess. So I mean, they couldn't get through the door, so what's the point? But I had to add, I'm getting a whole nother $10,000 sign. Like, this is really cost heavy to put on top of my sign that says you have to be at least 21 to consume cannabis and blah blah blah.
Are you going to read that when you're driving by over the Q Bridge? You're going to have time?
Apparently you can.
Yeah. I mean, no, the answer is absolutely not. It's a ridiculous regulation that I have to add, because regardless to what I advertise, if a child sees lit and says, ooh, I want to go there, they get to the door, they can't come in. Okay. You know, you have to be 21 to enter. But, you know, so billboards we cannot have. We can't have print advertisement, so I can't necessarily print out anything about my sales. I can't offer discounts to medical patients. I cannot. I can't call myself a dispensary, which is like the number one way which people
Why can't you call it dispensary? Because
officially the only entities that can refer to themselves as dispensaries are medical cannabis dispensaries with pharmacists, and
so what do you call
and I'm a cannabis retailer.
Okay.
So no one in the whole wide world, or maybe two people, are ever gonna Google cannabis retailer near me. They're gonna Google dispensary near me. So it puts me at a huge disadvantage, especially when I'm already dealing with medical cannabis that's been here.
Is this it?
We added that.
Yeah. So what's in it? What does it say about dispensary?
We added that anyone who is a retailer can now use the word dispensary. And
is that in HB 5350?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that was just because, you know, again, the legislature is listening, you know, and they're listening to people. I believe in the last couple of years, they were listening to the people with the resources and the lobbyists and, you know, the people, and now they're listening to me. The people who are really like living out social equity and having these real time difficulties. You know, right now I'm at the end of my financial runway. I had enough money where, I could hold my business down for, a certain amount of months, and things like this extra $10,000 sign that I added to a $10,000 sign, it's really shortening my financial runway.
Are you in danger of going out of business? Or?
I'm not in danger of going out of business, but I am in danger of maybe being able to keep the same number of inventory products available, having, adequate staff. Like, I might have to run the show for a little while. And I don't want to do that. Like, that's the exact opposite of what I should be doing
and
as
if
a social
this passes,
equity.
is this going to get you over the hump?
It won't get me. Huh? Oh, he said if it passes, will it get me over the hump? It won't help me necessarily right now. What I'm going to need to do is reach out to the Social Equity Council and apply for a loan. They have another financial program that they announced that they're working on. So when that's available, I'll look into it. But I have to do what I have to do to continue operating as I am. We are reaching our goal. We are moving towards to be profitable. I need to see 200 people a day.
How many do you get now?
We are averaging at about 95.
Mm-hmm. That's so you've been in business less than a year.
Yes.
It takes businesses years to be profitable.
Exactly. So we're on the right path and the path forward, but because of all of the other things, like I said, licensing fee. Again, each and every employee, every year I have to pay for them to get a new license, which is $50 for regular employees, $100 for key employees, which are like managers, and I have to pay for background checks. These background checks, they don't matter.
They have new background checks
every year.
So is that in the bill or no?
No, but this is like, and I would have, this wasn't really, everything has been, as I'm living it, I'm, realizing, oh my God, this is a problem, and so now with licensor, of course I knew we had to renew, but I didn't think about how much it would take out of my operating expenses to pay $12,500 plus, for each of my employees, background checks and licensing fees.
So is the idea that if they pass the background check, but a year later they worried they might have gone back into something bad?
I mean, you could do just about anything and still work at a dispensary. Like, we made sure that, like, of course, like, your criminal history shouldn't exclude you because we're saying, we're saying so. You could do something in a year and still work there. So it kind of is an unnecessary, huge, like that's almost $1,000 in background checks.
So I think like one of the struggles, just to kind of, move off of what Kibra is talking about, is when this law passed, there's the regulation piece, which Department of Consumer Protection has. And their job is to make sure that the market's safe, the products are safe, we're not targeting children, things of that nature, which are very important. But that agency has enormous resources and has a track record of regulating other industries. And then there was the Social Equity Council. And the state, in fairness, did not give the Social Equity Council the resources it needed from the outset. And you can see that in what you're hearing today. For instance, there's $50 million that the state legislature allocated years ago before the industry became legal to help social equity applicants. I think maybe we might be close to getting 1 million of that out the door, the Social Equity Council.
Wow.
And again, I don't blame anyone at the Social Equity Council. I think that the state, when they did that, they didn't really understand that the Social Equity Council didn't have all the resources they needed because it's complex. The financial, issuing a loan in the cannabis industry is really complex. There are banking issues, there's borrowing issues, there's lending issues. You can't use the form DECD, Department of Economic and Community Development loan application because it doesn't apply to this unregulated industry. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of challenges there, and I just want to kind of point that out, that I think at the outset it was sort of unfair to the Social Equity Council because they weren't given the resources they needed to really implement the policies and give the kind of help and support to Kibra and some of the other social equity businesses across the state.
Well,
they're catching up though.
They are.
We're talking about how year 4 is going to be the year they're going to improve the way we have the legal recreational marijuana industry dealing in Connecticut. We just have a couple minutes left. I wonder if you could tell me what is the Connecticut Cannabis Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, sure. So, I founded it a few years ago with my friend Deborah Cabanis and Dan Glissman. And I had been working with Kibra on the legalization, and my friend Devon Ward and many others, Jason Rojas, and a bunch of legislative leaders, Juan Candelaria, from here in New Haven and a lot of other leaders across the state. And then I found I was getting phone calls from, friends and family and people I didn't know who were just saying, hey, I know you were working on this. I saw your name in something. How do we do this? How do we apply? And honestly, I had to become more of an expert on those things. But I was spending so much time answering questions. I said, this is a real opportunity. And I spoke to some of the chambers of commerce in our state, and they didn't want to accept these types of businesses at that point because.
So you're not a member of the Chamber of Commerce?
I am, but yes.
Yeah. I feel like every week you get an award from a business group or a civic group.
Never them though. I keep applying. They keep saying no.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of, and you can tell. I mean, you go into even the way the state treats the business, right? Windows are blacked out, and Keeper can't put certain things on our signs or have certain signs. So there's still a little bit of there's still a need there for the industry to have an advocate and to be organized, and it's been challenging because interests are sometimes disparate, especially at the outset because you've got the established. Keeper was talking about the multi-state operators.
Right.
You've got social equity applicants. You've got some of the micro grows. You've got Reno. You've got this diverse group of folks, and their interests aren't always the same. So it's been a struggle to keep everyone together. But I think they're more together.
So how many members do you have of the Connecticut Cannabis Chamber?
We have a little over 50 and growing.
And are the members dispensaries/retailers and growers?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there's cultivators, there's retailers, there's manufacturers, there's delivery. And
how is a cannabis chamber of commerce event different from a chamber of commerce?
Well, we're talking about
is it
our
more
industry.
Fun?
No. Yes. We're working towards that.
What makes it more fun?
We got a really good advice from one of our partners, Brandon McGee, to do happy hours more. So we're doing happy hours more.
And are they cannabis happy hours or alcohol?
Good question. We're working on ways to have a good time together as a group. And we try to, we really try to bring the industry together, just like regular chambers do, but also put people in front of them that can be helpful to them. So people like later today, we have an event at Pullman and Conley Law Firm in Hartford. And Lila from DCP, Department of Consumer Protection, is going to be there to do sort of a Q&A. So we do our best to kind of give these forums to our members and to be supportive of them at the local level as well.
So any parting messages for why people should support, we're going to call them dispensaries, dispensaries rather than smoke shops or driving to Massachusetts to get weed?
Yes, I'd say support local businesses, support Lit New Haven, because of the fact that we are community centered, community focused, and giving you great, healthy products that we can stand behind.
All right. Well, Keeper Smith Bolden, who's a very familiar voice on this radio station, and Adam Wood and Nicole Burns, thank you for joining us, and thank you for making the trip down.
Absolutely.
On Dateline New Haven. And thanks to Denise Chernecki doing a great job behind the controls while Harry Droz has a much-deserved vacation.
Enjoy your vacation, Harry.
We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, and all weekend long on WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.